Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Finance Committee meeting, where we have 4 items on the agenda to approve. Each member of council participates on this committee. I'm the chairman of this committee. And so Mr. Sass is missing, but we're going to go ahead and get started because we have our guest, Secretary Hall from the SCDOT with us today. She's going to make a presentation on the 526 completion. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Hall and her staff. So Secretary Hall, you can come right on up.
Would you like to move for approval of the minutes? I'll also move those.
Okay.
Second.
Moving second, any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no addition or deletions. Okay. We are now in the hands of our Secretary of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you.
Chairman, members of council, it's our pleasure to be here this evening to provide you an update on the Mark Clark Extension Project. As you know, I sent a letter to council a few weeks ago transmitting an updated estimate along with recommendations on the path forward for the project. We're here today to provide a little more detail behind that estimate, what's in it, what the elements are, where it fits in the overall process, and then we'll conclude with our recommendations to council as well as to the State Infrastructure Bank on path forward on this project. This time I'd like to call Jay Maddox up to the podium so he can walk us through the individual elements of the presentation. Jay?
All right, thank you, Secretary, Council. So it's a pleasure to be here and talk about the project. The first thing, before we get talking about money, which I know that's why we're here to talk about the cost estimate, I want to frame it within the project purpose because it's very important that we remember why this project came to be in the first place. So I'll read it. This is the purpose and need statement. We showed this to the public over the last decade that I've been a part of the project. So the purpose of the Mark Clark Extension Project is to increase the capacity of the regional transportation system, improve safety, enhance mobility to and from West Ashley, Johns Island, and James Island areas of Charleston. So a few words that I'll call out, call your attention to is regional transportation systems. This is not a project for James Island or Johns Island or West Ashley. It's for the entire region as a whole. Improve safety. Safety is always our number one. Enhance mobility. So safety, mobility for the regional network. All right, so the current project status. As you know, we went through an extensive public involvement period last fall through a series of public meetings, small public gatherings on Saturdays at farmers markets that ultimately led to formal public hearing events in West Ashley, Johns Island, and James Island. Where we are today, so we took comments. We shared the public, we shared our recommended preferred alternative, and we took comments during that period. So in essence, over the last 6 months, we have been working on responding to those comments, making tweaks to the preferred alternative as needed based on the information that we obtained through that public involvement period. We're currently working on additional environmental studies. Visual impact assessment study, that's one in particular that we're full steam ahead on now. Some other environmental studies related to property mitigation, impacts to parks. We've got some pretty significant impacts to the James Island County Park specifically, so working through some mitigation components for those folks. We're also conducting a settlement community study to study the African American history in James Island, Johns Island, and West Ashley. So as part of this environmental process, we capture that history that may or may not have been written down and recorded. So that will be a nice piece of that mitigation package to have it and preserve it through this project. Traffic analysis, where now, and you will learn more about that here in the next few minutes, is traffic analysis to support a phased approach to the project. Understanding that the project budget is high, it's higher than it was a few years ago. So looking at opportunities to build the project in pieces. We're working on the permits. There's Coast Guard permits and there's Corps of Engineer permits for this job. So working on those in concert with the development of the environmental studies related to the FEIS. And then we recently conducted a complex and lengthy process to update the cost estimate, which is in part why we're here today. So we'll talk through some of that. This is Alternative G. This is a figure that you guys are probably fairly familiar with. It shows how we would propose to build the project if it were built in 2 phases, with a phase 1 beginning where the project currently ends, 526 ends in West Ashley, over to Johns Island and building connectors A and connectors B. And we're conducting traffic studies now to basically prove that this would work if you built a phase 1 and phase 2 came sometime in the future. With phase 2 picking up at connector B and completing at the James Island connector. All right, there's a lot going on this slide. I want you to focus really on the top piece, and this is the schedule. So the black diamonds on this line here, these are the major milestones. So the very first one, Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, that was a milestone we reached last August. By reaching that milestone, that allowed us to move into the public involvement phase of the project. So we've passed that. You see April 2022 on the diagonal line there, that's where we are basically now. We're in May, but we updated the preliminary estimate. So we updated the cost estimate. And that was the notice that you guys have received from Secretary Hall. I guess it was last week that gave that number. And before we talk about that number, I want to continue just down the schedule so you can understand where we're at and where we need to go. So we've got the new estimate. Next order of business is we have to finish the final environmental impact statement. I mentioned earlier we're finishing these studies. We're having to conduct some additional studies as part of that process. So we've got to complete that process. One piece of that is identify funding for the projects. That's partly why we're here today, is so we can begin to have that conversation on how we're going to address the funding in this final environmental impact statement, which will be a required component for approval of that document. Assuming we get that, we have a final environmental impact statement, we get it approved by FHWA, then we would move into another series of public meetings so that we can then brief the public and catch them up on where we're at with the funding, how we're going to phase it, and explain all those bits and pieces to them. Meanwhile, we'll be seeking the permits, the Corps permit, as well as the Corps permit and the record of decision, which is the final piece of the environmental process to get that record of decision from FHWA. So here you'll see that's basically 2 years from today, a little less than 2 years, to get to that point if we identify a funding plan within the next year. Outside of a year, that's when we start delay, because we will not be able to finish that FEIS or final environmental impact statement until that funding plan is identified. So it's 2 years really to get to that permit. The 2 to 3 years here of potential litigation, I just want to call your attention to that. That's something that we'll have to deal with. We think that we would obviously get a challenge upon receipt of the Corps permit and the signing of the record of decision. So we've assumed 2 to 3 years for that. After the litigation plays out, we could then begin a design build procurement to obtain the contractor and the designer to design and build the project. That would take approximately 1 year. So you can't really see it in the figure below, and we can provide these to you after so you'll have copies. But this is just ultimately a cash flow forecast of what it would take in each year through the life of this project. Because I don't think I've said it yet, but the estimated cost of the project now is at $2.3 billion. And this shows that based on a phased approach to the project, what it would cost in each year from this year through 2035, assuming a pause for 3 years to face the litigation. But you'll see there are costs during that litigation piece, because we would assume we would continue to buy right away and things like that. They'll ultimately have to be purchased anyway as part of the project, so we could stay busy during that time, so it wouldn't be necessarily pencils down. Okay.
Step in here for just a minute. So this estimate is different than previous estimates we provided to you in one significant major way, and that is we look to, instead of doing a cost estimate for the project and maybe escalating it 1 or 2 years based on getting it through procurement, the team really went and did a very thorough analysis of all the risks, as well as what we would expect to be the realistic timeframes for the project. Even if all the funding was available and in the bank today to build the project, we would still recommend phasing the project regardless. And I'm sure my chief engineer will talk through that in a few minutes as to why that's important. It's the same business practice that we do at the state DOT on our large capital projects. And it's absolutely, in my opinion, essential on this particular project to phase it for various reasons that we'll get into here shortly. But if you look at this time frame on the project and how it's phased out and laid out here, we factored in time for an expected legal challenge, and we feel like that's realistic. Expect that to happen, very similar to other projects like this in other areas of the state where we've had challenges. And so we felt like it was our duty to bring back to you sort of that range of where we believe the estimate could potentially land on the project at this point in the process. Jay?
So, Mr. Chairman, Leland Colvin, I'm our Deputy Secretary for Engineering. I think a couple points before we move on and Jay kind of gets into the details of some of the risk elements we have. As Secretary Hall mentioned, we looked at this cost, schedule, or risk assessment that's required by Federal Highway. And I think one of the things worth pointing out is it started with a baseline of $1.6 billion. And then you take that $1.6 billion and it grew to $2.35 billion based on risk assumptions that we made as a project team. Not only the risk assessments, also looking at the schedule components of that $1.6 billion figure. We'll have a recommendation at the very end of the presentation to maybe get a second opinion on that cost estimate and look at the risk that we assign to certain portions of the projects as well. And also, Mr. Chairman, as we go back one slide here, I think that we've learned this lesson maybe the hard way at SCDOT on the Carolina Crossroads project or Malfunction Junction here in Columbia. We had about a $2.6 billion project, and we bid that out as one lump sum project back in 2018 and had one bidder. So we've been doing a lot of discussion with contractors, my counterparts across all 50 states, and really the appetite amongst the construction industry for that larger project just isn't really there. Florida DOT had a very big project. I-4, Skanska, who built the Ravenel Bridge, was part of that project team, and really that was kind of the poster child of how much risk a contractor wants to take. So we've taken Malfunction Junction, we've broken that down into 5 phases. So it was one big phase, and we've broken it down into 5 phases. The first 2 phases are under construction now, and then we're getting ready to go to the construction with our third and our biggest phase, which is going to be somewhere in the $1 billion cost component. So our recommendation is, first time we really talked about it publicly, our recommendation to the county, if the money was sitting in a pot today, we would still want to recommend that we phase this project just from a contractor capacity and also a competition standpoint to make sure you get a good competitive bid. So just wanted to point that out as Jay continues forward. And we've got some other recommendations to how do we get from 1.6 to 2.35, and then how do we mitigate those risks, number one, and then how do we get better confirmation that that's a good number. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so the previous cost, $725 million, that's been the cost figure that we've been using since 2014. When that number was developed in 2014, it was based on a year of construction of 2019. Clearly, we've passed that. The 2.3, so alternative use now is at 2.3 billion, and that's based on a year of construction beginning in 2028 and running through 2035. The new estimate was finalized just a few weeks ago, and like we said, it assumes sequential, not concurrent construction of phase 1 and 2. So basically, we build phase 1, and then we start building phase 2 at the end of phase 1 under 2 separate contracts. And like Secretary said, the actual cost, I mean, at this point, they will be unknown until bids are received. It's a very volatile market currently. Secretary has described it as highly speculative figure due to the significant amount of inflation built into the estimate, and we'll talk some about that. So why did it go up? First, base construction cost increase. Just like Leland said, the 1.6 billion, that was the base cost that we went into our process with. So the 725 turned to 1.6. Why? Basically, market conditions and inflation. That was a huge part of it. I mean, we all know that things cost more now than they did in 2014, a lot more. In addition, we took a harder look at right-of-way. A lot has changed in the project area. Right-of-way costs, property values have skyrocketed in all parts of the state, especially this particular area is unique. And then schedule and risk costs. So we spent multiple days going through every component of this project and understanding that, okay, this is how we assume things to happen. We assume this under the ground when we start digging, we're going to find this. But, you know, there's a risk that we may encounter something that's unknown, or we may encounter this. So we tried to determine what the likelihood of that risk occurring. And we did this hundreds of times with hundreds of different issues. And so then we ran this simulation that simulated the project tens of thousands of times, and it basically came up with the 2.3 billion in all of the different scenarios as the likely cost. The cost that would not exceed, so that cost or below. So that range, like Leland was talking about, 1.6 to 2.3, somewhere in there is what we would expect this project to cost. Just some areas, if you want to know some specific numbers. The base cost, that's $700 million. You know, that's the fact that a piece of wood cost, 2x4 cost $3 in 2019, and now it's $750. That's where the $700 million comes from. Then some other areas where we saw some increase, this mobilization of the site to the contractor when we started taking a hard look, access to certain areas of this project to build it. When you really start digging in, you understand that there's some areas of this project that are going to be very complex to get materials, to get people in them to build the project. Traffic control, traffic has clearly increased. There's more congestion now than there was when well, heck, when I started working on the project over a decade ago. Traffic has gotten significantly worse. Additional contingencies through that risk process, through right-of-way. The right-of-way number is pretty significant, but we said, you know, property values have ultimately increased significantly. And then delay costs. $112 million. That's what we estimate for the 3-year delay for litigation. So we want to reduce risk. We want to lower costs. We need to figure out how to do things faster, how to reduce the delays, because the sooner we start, obviously the cheaper or the lower cost it will be, because time is money and things are not getting any cheaper. So here are the next steps, and Secretary, you want to talk about these, or you want me to run through them?
I'll be glad to. Thank
All right.
you. That's great. Appreciate that. So, Mr. Chairman, many of these elements were included in the letter that I provided the council. There's one new item that we added to this, and that is we feel like it's very important for us to reach out and get an independent verification of the data of our estimated project cost using contractors to help come in and do that look over the shoulder of some of the assumptions that Jay talked about previously. Are we on target, off target? Are we too low, too high? Are we about right where we need to be? Are there things that maybe we missed? Are there things that we included that really may not be as big of a concern to those contractors? So we want to do that industry review of the cost estimate, and we've already made some contact to get that initiated going forward. We want to work with the county and the State Infrastructure Bank on keeping this project moving forward. Primarily, as Jay mentioned, we need to really get to the point of actually being able to receive bids on the project, to get it basically, as he mentioned, shovel-ready. Because at the end of the day, it's still going to be a speculative figure until we actually get bids on the project. And these estimates will continue to get refined over time. What if there is no litigation on the project? What if the litigation gets solved in 1 year versus 3 years? What if it takes 4 years? So all those elements will, we're not going to know those things until they actually happen. So right now what we're trying to do is to provide our best estimate on what we feel like those risk elements could cost. So we'll do this industry review. Our recommendation is to continue forward, developing the project, working with the county, working with the infrastructure bank on these items. So we are requesting authorization to proceed with $150 million in remaining preliminary work split equally 50-50 between the two entities. And we're providing that same recommendation to the infrastructure bank. And as we've mentioned repeatedly during the presentation, the project does need to be phased. And not specifically for cost reasons, but for all the reasons Deputy Secretary Colvin mentioned, with contractor interest, to make sure that you're delivering a good project that can be built, that the industry is receptive to and willing to bid on, to ensure that you get competition on a project like this. And we remain committed, Mr. Chairman, to work with the county and the infrastructure bank on working through what is a reasonable funding plan for the project to satisfy those requirement gates that Jay mentioned in his presentation to get to that final document. Deputy Secretary Colvin, do you have anything you wish to add? And then I'll open it up for questions.
No, ma'am, I think you hit on, I think one of the key components, Mr. Chairman, is this was an engineering team with Federal Highway, great engineers, great federal partners, but it is definitely a different perspective when you look through the eyes of a contractor. So we reached out to the executive director for the Association of General Contractors here in South Carolina and said, hey, we need some help. And just to be honest with you, Mr. Chairman, when the number came out, my phone rang, as I'm sure a lot of folks in this room, and really started asking a lot of questions, which made us, there were some time components that we talked about, but I think, I really think given, recommending that we move forward with that industry review and having those contractors really lay their eyes on it, and how do you access these two intercoastal water bridges? I mean, there's a lot of details that could potentially save some costs there, and also let us know how we can reduce those risks that Jay mentioned earlier, so that you close that gap between the 1.6 billion and the 2.35.
Yeah, that's absolutely critical, and we've learned that as well at the state DOT. The more of those risk elements that you can eliminate before you put the project to the contractor to build, the better return you're going to get on the estimate or the bids that come in. So because those risk elements, when you shift that responsibility to the contractor, you're going to pay for that. So you might as well pay for it up front and get it resolved so that you get a really good construction bid to actually deliver the project. And that's our recommendation here, Mr. Chairman, as we've indicated. Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to take any questions.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to come down, you and your two fellow partners, from coming down to give us this information. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask council members. I'm going to start with Mr. Middleton, and then I'm coming back this way. If they have any questions, they can ask questions. But again, we will not be voting on this tonight. This is just information that was brought to us by the secretary. And later on down the road, we'll discuss our options, because she's going to have to come back to us again, I think, with some more information. So, Reverend Middleton, do you have anything?
Will we receive a copy of this presentation?
Yes, sir. It should have been emailed to you, but if not, if you want a hard copy, I'll ask Ms. Salisbury to give it to you. But it was emailed, I think, 2 weeks ago.
Not this presentation,
Not
the
this one.
letter.
The letter was emailed. Okay.
Yeah, I have the
But
letter.
this
I'm talking about
So,
this specific
yes,
presentation.
we'll make sure I'll have her email it to Ms. Salisbury, and then that way everybody will get a copy.
And I think
Chairman, we have hard copies with us. I apologize for not providing them ahead of time.
That's all right. Thank you so much.
I was wondering why there weren't too many notes being taken.
Thank you.
well, once I consume, digest this,
Yes.
then I'll have questions.
Yes. All right, Mr. Swears.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, thank you all so much for being here. I feel like we, in a way, we've dodged a bullet here. I mean, what if we were 2 or 3 years into the project right now, and these costs surfaced? I mean, that for them to increase that much in that short time period, if we were in the middle of the project, and you could say, well, we would sue the contractor because they made a bid, they'd have to stick to it. Everybody knows that's really not the case. They would do one of two things: either get us to pay more money, or they would go bankrupt with a project this size. So I feel like in a way we've dodged a bullet. But the reality is the project could be, as you said, as high as $2.3 billion. When I first got on council, I used to talk about millions, and every now and then I'd say, yeah, that's a billion with a B, like fractions of a billion. Now we're talking about multiple billions. That's certainly beyond the scope, in my opinion, of what county council can tackle. And we decided by contract a number of years back that we, the county, we're gonna take the bull by the horns on this thing, and we were gonna handle it instead of DOT. I think that was a tragic mistake by us. Now at $2.3 billion, I question whether it's too big for the state. I mean, that moves the needle on state budgets at $2.3 billion. So I'm very concerned about that. This is almost more in the federal scope when you're talking numbers those big. So those are some of my very big concerns. And by contract right now, it's my understanding that all overages above $420 million with an M are to be borne by the county. Those are our responsibility. Not that we can't seek funds elsewhere, but the state's responsibility by contract is $420 million, period, at this point, correct?
So that is the current funding agreement between the county and the State Infrastructure Bank for the particular project. Again, as I've mentioned, we certainly want to facilitate and help the county and the infrastructure banks talk through a reasonable funding plan for the project. And back to a couple of your comments, if I may, since I have the mic at this point in time. The cost of doing road work is a lot different than it was nearly 10 years ago, which is the time frame that we're talking about on these estimates. Our widening of existing 526, that we're expecting that project to be somewhere in the $4 to $7 billion range. And we're planning to pay for that project at the state level as part of our annual program. The widening of I-85 in the upstate is close to $1 billion by itself, just to widen the section between Cherokee and Spartanburg counties up to the North Carolina state line, let alone the nearly $350 million interchange that we just completed in the Greenville area. So road work is expensive. The days of a $300 million new location or $400 million or $700 million new location project are behind us, unfortunately. It's just where we are today. The reality of the cost of doing work, the reality of a project like this with major river crossings, a lot of work in very sensitive areas. Is the estimate $2.3 billion? Well, our current forecast is that it could be as high as that. But as I said earlier, this is a very speculative figure. There's a lot of things in it, and you're not really going to know what the true cost is until you start to receive bids on the project at that point in time, which, we're based on our forecast, that could be as long as 5 to 6 years down the road from today. Things could be dramatically different 5 or 6 years from now.
But under the current contract, those risks are all borne by the county. That's very scary to me, because $2.3 billion, even if our responsibility is $1.5 billion, that's out of our league. We can't play in that game. So, I'll be real curious to see what proposals are made to how we fund this, because I just think it's out of our league. The state should be running this whole project. It never should have been relinquished from the state. The county, it's interesting how the county even got into this thing. The state, I think the CIV needed a local sponsor. And the county, I was on county council at that time, we reluctantly said we'll be the local sponsor. And now here we are holding a $2.3 billion, potentially $2.3 billion project. That's phenomenal to me. It still hasn't sunk in. It's still surreal to me. phasing, you say, I think the way you define phasing is a little bit different than the way others would define phasing. What if we did phase one and then there was no money for phase two? Do we have to have already identified all funding and then we phase it for construction purposes? Or are we allowed to only really have a plan for phase one with a promise we'll do phase two?
Well, as I mentioned in my letter, the term is reasonable availability of funding. So what we at the state DOT is looking for is there a realistic and reasonable path forward to funding phases one and phases two of the project, whatever that looks like. And we'll be happy to work with your staff to talk through, the elements that we believe would check the boxes for us on that particular approach. So you've got that component, and then you really have got, when we talk phasing, what we're really talking about is delivery of the project to construction and building the project.
Right. In other words, we're not going to work on the entire project at one time, so we might as well only bid and pay for what we're building at the time.
Well,
So that's phasing.
as I said earlier, even if you had $2.35 billion in the bank today and said, go build this project, DOT, my recommendation is still going to be to you the exact same thing that we've laid out here, that you absolutely have to phase the project in order to ensure that you get bids on the project that are competitive and are able to ensure that you're able to leverage contractor capacity and availability. As Deputy Secretary Colvin mentioned, we had a project about the same size that we put to market, and we got one bid on it. So the dilemma that we had was, do we open that one bid and assume that it's a good bid, or do we break the project up and to foster more competition to drive down the price of the project at the end of the day, still deliver it in the same amount of time frame that we were planning to? What's the best way that we can ensure that we get competition on this project and get good solid bids on it? And it is through a phasing approach, just like what's recommended here.
And that's troubling as well. I mean, if you only had one bid, let's say we only get one bid on either phase one or phase two, and you go with that one bid, and it's a huge project, even broken into phases, what happens when that contractor says, we can't do it for this, we underbid? You sue.
We've never had that. No, sir, we've never had that happen. And that's part of the sophisticated nature of how we package projects up to market. We're a lot different than we were, say, 5 years ago, bringing big projects to market to receive bids on them. We analyze capacity. We actually travel throughout the Southeast to try to make sure that we're attracting out-of-state contractors to come in as JV, joint venture arrangements, along with in-state firms partnering together to be able to go after projects like this. You really have to have a great understanding of what the industry can do, how much the state DOT and others are putting out to market, the timing of that, as well as managing those risk components like Jay mentioned in his presentation. All those elements come into bringing a project to market, either in whole or in phases, depending on conditions and what's best for that project. All those elements come together to deliver what I believe would be a successful project. So, Council Member, our recommendation is still going to stand that the project has to be phased.
And I don't argue that. I agree with the whole concept of phasing it. But do the permits allow us to not really identify a rock solid source for phase two and still start on phase one?
So as Jay went through this in his presentation, and so what we're looking for, just like I had mentioned in the letter that I provided to council, is that we are looking for a reasonable availability of funding for the entire project. And as I said earlier, we're more than happy to work with council and staff on what those elements look like, what those things could be. We're not going to ask you to go out and issue $2.35 billion in bonds and have it in the bank. We wouldn't do that ourselves. We're not going to ask you to do that. So more to come on that.
Right, 2.3 billion, I have a hard time saying billion. in bonds, that's another good topic. When we talk about the cost, you gave it a window. You said from 2028 to 2035, and those would be the costs during that window. Okay, odds are we will not totally fund it in that window, so we will have to issue bonds. So much like the half-cent sales tax referendums that we've had, we had 2 of them, and they were each 25 years, and each of them, the nominal value that was given to the public, I think, was 1.2, and then the second one was 1.3 billion dollars. Okay, most people thought that meant we were going to have that much money to spend. That was not the case at all. That was the money we would raise through the entire 25-year period. So the upfront money, a lot of that we decided to bond it upfront. But it was far less spending money than that 1.2 and 1.3 billion dollars. So when we talk about even 2.3 billion dollars, or let's say it comes in at an even 2 billion, when you look at that number on your 2035 date, we're not going to have that paid off at that time. So that the cost of money will kick in at that point, and that cost will be to us.
Mr. Swears, that's something we gonna have to decide. She can't decide that for us. She's just giving us the information. And so, the question you're asking her, that's something council will have to decide. So if you can wrap it up and then we move on to somebody else.
I just want the public to understand what the
Yes, I
$2.3
understand.
billion dollars actually means. That's not an all-in cost.
When we come back to that, when we all discuss that, you'll be able to do that. Reverend Middleton, you got?
One last question.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
The project that y'all get the estimate for is still a parkway project, correct? It is not a interstate, is a parkway, is that correct?
That's correct, right?
Yes, it'll be a parkway with a lower speed limit than a
What is the
traditional
speed limit,
interstate.
40 or 45, something like that?
45 miles per hour is what we're looking at now.
Okay, that's all for now.
All right, I'll go back to Reverend Middleton. All right, Mr. Darby, I come to you, Reverend Everett.
I don't know whether to laugh or to cry. I mean, really, we've gone from 725 million to 1.6 billion. Who's to say? I mean, down to 2.352 billion. Who's to say that it's not going to go up another 648 million to $3 billion? The word that I learned tonight is speculative. We are now saying, based upon 8 or 9 miles of an extension, I think boils down between $287 million to $294 million per mile. That is astronomical. $287 million a mile. According to my last conjecture, it was only $1 million a mile for real. To build 526 is not going to resolve the transportation problem. It's only going to marginally reduce traffic problems. And to put in $287 million to $294 million per mile. I'm going to make up a word. That goes against every code of economic jurisprudence. I don't understand that. I really don't. So my vote is not going to be speculative. My vote is going to be no. This is just too much. And then the county? What about the entire state of South Carolina? This is a state problem. This is not a county problem. This is a state problem. And this is really double taxation. I'm paying state taxes and county taxes for something the other folk going to use. They're going to use the tax dollars that they save, that we save them, for their property with upstate Greenville, Columbia, wherever. So I would never, ever go with this for a number of years, because sometimes we don't like to follow leadership. But again, it's not going to resolve the problem. What's going to resolve our problem is to come up with a comprehensive transportation plan, which includes rail. Chicago, Atlanta, Charlotte, They have moved with jet-like speed to resolve their transportation problems. But come to South Carolina, it's almost horse and buggy speed. So, Mr. Chairman, for those who are anti-526, you don't have to worry about emailing me because we're on the same team.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Ms. Honeycutt.
I'm not going to belabor the point, Madam Secretary. Thank you so much for being here. I look forward to renegotiating with the state and looking for a path forward potentially. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Hall, I thank you for coming here and bringing more clarification to the information you provided us in the letter. I think that was very helpful to me, and I was surprised to see that when you had the breakdown of how you came to this estimate, so much money was put in for legal fees. And that seems to be our detriment, that every time we talk about this project, going from one phase to the next, is always some kind of legal blockade that runs up the price extensively on this project. Now, I do recall that, and if I'm wrong, you just please let me know, the monies that has already been allocated for this project cannot be used for no other project if this was aborted.
So are you referring to another,
The
transferring the SIB dollars to another?
Right.
So I can't speak for the SIB. The SIB and the state DOT are separate entities, but it's my understanding from the SIB on similar other projects, the posture of the State Infrastructure Bank has traditionally been that the dollars roll back into the SIB for the SIB to make decisions on what other projects that they would want to fund. And I'm sure your staff and probably many members of council are aware that there is a long list of potential projects that the SIB has received applications for that are currently unfunded. So again, I can't speak for exactly what the SIB would do, but I would doubt that there would be much appetite to allow the dollars to be reassigned.
So you make a good point that if we abort this project, then it sounds like we'd have to go back to the end of the line and start all over.
Well, to several other members' point on this project, it's not going to get cheaper. The project's not going to get any cheaper. Now, we may, based on the industry review, be able to find some areas where we can reduce the risk that we've assumed, or maybe find some new approaches to mitigating the risk using that industry input. But at the end of the day, it's not going to magically go back to a $725 million project. It's going to be a significant project, and the longer that it gets delayed, the larger that price tag is going to be on it. So it's very similar to you building a house. The price of building a house in 2014 is a lot different than the price of building a house today, if you can find a contractor that has the capacity to build the house for you. Those same dynamics are playing out in road construction and bridge construction today. And this particular project, I think it's important to remember that this project isn't just a simple two-lane roadway out in the middle of a pasture. It crosses some very significant wetland areas, major river crossings. At least 2 major bridges will be part of this project at the end of the day. So, let's not forget that there's some very expensive elements incorporated into this project as part of the project.
Okay, just 2 more points quickly. The settlement communities you mentioned earlier, that you all plan to do some studies for that. So if this is in my district, I certainly would like to participate in this whenever you get ready to do the study, to get communities involved in that. And you don't have a magical wand for stopping the traffic to even continue to increase going on James and Johns Island, do you?
Ma'am, that is a struggle that we have all across the state, but in particular in this region. Based on the latest census, we are the 10th fastest growing state in the nation, and that's 2020 data. So think about what was happening in 2020 and 2021. So we've seen a lot of movement into the state, especially in this area. All the coastal areas of the state have seen dramatic increases in population. You've got a lot of, maybe it's just me, but it seems like families, instead of having 1 or 2 cars, have 3 or 4 cars. These days, everybody seems to have a car and driving around and commuting. And so it's just amplified going forward. You guys know it better than I do. Traffic's an issue in this region.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hall, we appreciate your presence here and y'all's hard work to bring this very important information to us. We're glad that y'all are trying to be ahead on this game and working on it. I know that you have a lot of big needs elsewhere in the state and a lot of other projects you're working on, including the real Mark Clark that's already built in our area here as well. It's very important. I did have a question. When we talked several years ago with the SIB, there was always questions about additional funding coming from other places. Is that possible for additional funding maybe to come from other pots of other places? Would that affect the amount of money that we have? I was concerned that at one point in time there might have been a restriction on us obtaining any other money from other places.
And I can't speak for the infrastructure bank, but certainly we look forward to facilitating a meeting between the county, the DOT, and the infrastructure bank to talk through that reasonable availability of funding, what that looks like, what the SIB requirements are. To the council lady's question earlier, what if there is no desire to move forward with the project? Then what happens, and what does that look like? So we look forward to working with your staff as needed on those discussions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Moody?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hall, thank you for being here. Your teammate, also your former Commissioner Robbins, have always been great partners of ours, and we appreciate the continued partnership. Before I ask a few questions about 526, I saw there are a few more public comment period options coming up, and I would love to pick your brain at some point as to what the state may be doing on the public comment period, because what we're doing here is not working. We had a road diet over here on Azalea Drive, and we got 30 comments, and it was the best thing they ever heard of. We did the North Bridge, we got 200 comments, 195 comments were affirmative. 526, where Councilmember Middleton and I work in West Ashley, has never been south of 75%, but the public comment period for this was 40-something%. It's a public advocacy comment period. We're not reaching mom and pop. So how we do that, I don't know what the answer is to that, but on the 526, we got over 800 or 900 comments on the last day because an advocacy group asked their people to reach out. That's not public comment period. So anyway, I just say that. But I agree with your assessment, Secretary Hall. I think in 5 years it's going to be $4 billion, in 10 years it's going to be $10 billion. So the prudent thing is to move this thing forward and get it shovel ready. The need has never changed. The need's only getting worse on James and Johns Island, especially in West Ashley. There are, by any count, 30,000 to 40,000 cars a day in West Ashley that should not be, and that's dangerous and it's troubling. I think the data we pulled together, and maybe I'll have you speak of the significance of this project, was that a reduction in daily vehicle miles, over 42,000 miles, hours traveled, 115,000 miles, reductions in delay, 112,000 hours. Can you speak to maybe whether statewide or regionally the significance of this project?
Certainly, thank you for that question. Our response is simply this: the need for the project is obvious. All you have to do is look at a couple of aerial photographs of the area from a couple of decades ago, and then look at the most recent aerial photographs of the area, and you can see the amount of growth that has happened. Congestion remains an issue, and I'm very much aware of the county working on some projects. Thank you very much for your efforts there at Main and 17 and some other things that will help address some of these issues. but those are not they're not going to be the silver bullet to the issues that you have. It's going to take all these elements together, working together, to try to address some of the concerns of the folks in the region. And I would add that we unfortunately have a lot of experience with this over the last several years, whether it's in this region or the Hilton Head region or up in the Georgetown, Horry area. Hurricane evacuation and being able to effectively move people out of the areas prior to a storm and back into the areas for recovery and restoration type activities and just reentry is very, very important. It's something that we look at quite regularly. As a matter of fact, you may be aware that we recently modified our lane reversal plan for I-26 because of the tremendous amount of growth in this region and the impact that reversal was having by us extending it as far down as we were on 26 to 526. We've since moved it up and done some additional work on 26 to help facilitate that. And the widening of 26 that we have planned, that 70 miles to connect Columbia up to the Somerville area with a full 6-lane segment all the way through, part of it is movement of freight in and out of our coastal port, as well as dealing with the freight that comes up 95 to 26 and then up to the other part of the state. But another part of it is hurricane evacuation and understanding just how critical that is to be able to safely move people in and out of areas. So that's one element, but certainly the larger element is the day-to-day movement of people and goods in this particular fast-growing area of the state.
Thank you, Secretary Hall. Ms. Johnson, you hit it on the head. This slide showed $112 million because of delays. What about the lifetime of delays that I've said often? I rode my bicycle on this in the late 70s. It's a crime this isn't done, and no fault of yours, but it's been a weak council at times. There's been advocacy groups. When people ask me why it's been so big, I said you got one or two groups to call to thank them for this mess. So, but I thank you for your work, Secretary Hall, and that of your team. I look forward, like Ms. Honeycutt said, to moving this thing forward.
Thank you, Mr. Whitty. Mr. Werman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Hall, for your work on this. This has certainly been very helpful in understanding where we're at. I just, certainly I have some concerns like some of my other council members, but I think I'll just want to focus in on just understanding what's before us right now. And I understand the next real ask is for us to authorize, I guess it would be $75 million from the county to sort of continue the analysis. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that just, you talked a lot about obviously getting sort of an industry perspective on some of the estimates y'all have made. Is that just the only piece that 75 goes to, or is there other stuff sort of included in the what would ultimately be $150 million from both the SIB and the county?
So it's really kind of concurrent activities. What I would expect is going to happen is we will come back to you with a range, and that range will include the numbers that we've previously estimated, making certain risk assumptions as Jay went through in his presentation, and it will include also what we receive from the industry. So it could be something that would come back and say we would expect the project to cost between this amount and this amount, the total project. And then we may, depending on the industry, we may be able to quantify it. Phase 1 would be this range to this number, phase 2, this number to this number, for a total end to end from this number to this number. And again, I can't stress enough just how far out in time we're trying to forecast cost. So it's incredibly important, in my opinion, that we keep advancing the preliminary activities on the project, that $150 million ask that we've submitted to the SIB and to the county. Keep working on those elements. Get that project to a point to where you could continue to refine the cost estimates on it as you get closer to the point of receiving actual bids on a phase 1 of the project. This isn't the last time there'll be an estimate generated on this project. There'll be additional times going forward, and it will fluctuate. There's no doubt about it. It fluctuates on our projects all the time. But at this point in time, what we're trying to provide you is through our processes, as going through the environmental processes on the project, compliant with a federal aid type project, is providing you what we believe is a reasonable estimated cost at this point in time. Again, we'll come back to you with a range using that industry response information, and then concurrently with that, which I would expect we would be probably about 90 days away, maybe a little bit longer, 90 to 120 days away on coming back to you with that range. And then, of course, our recommendation, even with that, would be to continue moving forward on those preliminary activities. Don't pause the brakes on it. You just add more cost at the end of the day if you do that. Let's keep moving forward with that additional authorization and continue to work on that project to where we could actually get positioned to receive bids. The county could still, and the SIB could still make a decision not to issue bids and not to move forward with it at that point in time. But we are so far out in time on that I would encourage you not to make a decision based on something that's as speculative as it is today.
Understood, and thank you for that. I think there was some talk of 2.3, the new estimate being sort of an upper band, and some talk of it being sort of the estimate. I just want to clarify, is y'all's analysis suggesting that is sort of the upper band of some sort of like normal distribution bell curve, or is that the actual estimate?
All right, so I'm way out of my expertise on this thing because it's a highly engineered process that our team went through. There's an extensive report that we'll be happy to provide your staff on it. But at the end of the day, here's really the short version of it. So we went through and did what I would consider a base cost estimate without industry input. This is our project staff with engineering consultants, and that base cost estimate for the full project is $1.6 billion. Then we went in and did a risk assessment on all the risk elements to the project that Jay mentioned earlier. How are they going to access the project? How are they going to build the project? What do we expect the increases to be on land prices in the area to acquire the right-of-way and to relocate some of the folks that we need to relocate, thinking of the hotel and some other things based on experience that we've had on other projects. So we layered those items in, including a 3-year estimated delay due to litigation. Layered all those elements in, looking at inflation, all those different things, just like Jay mentioned. And so that layering is what led up to the $2.35 billion. So a base we generated, applying factors of risk and other inflation type things. Again, forecasting that this is going to come to market, in 2026, 2027 timeframe for phase one. Again, a lot of speculation in what's going to happen between now and then, and what may or may not be a risk on the project. So that's our internal assessment. 1.6 base, 2.35 with the factors applied to it. So now what we want to do is to reach out, and we have reached out to road contractors, bridge contractors, and said, we want you to come in independently, look over the shoulder, look at everything we've got, and tell us what elements are we on track, off track, what did we miss, did we over forecast something? Really that independent review of the data or the numbers that we've provided. So that's what we owe back to you going forward. When I said I expect we'll come back with a range that'll factor in the industry and then our number. So we'll come back to you with a range.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Madam Secretary. And we look forward to you coming back with that range. And so, when you come back, then we can discuss this even more. But I think the information that you put out for us and for the public is very, very good. And it couldn't be no speculation. It is what it is. But again, I want to thank you on behalf of this council for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come down and make this presentation. And I look forward to you coming back with that second part information, and then council can start diving into this and then figure out what we need to do. So again, thank you so much. Mr. Tootin, would you take them to the back for me? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you,
ma'am.
members of council.
You're welcome. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Okay, right now we're going to go to item number 3, which is a request from elected officials. Mr. Darby, Housing and Rehab. You want this on the agenda? You want to espouse on this before we take a vote, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm just of the opinion, Mr. Chairman, that there are so many houses which are dilapidated, which people are staying in, and I'm of the opinion if we could devote some of those dollars, anywhere between $2.5 million to $4 million to assist these people with their roofs and floors, that would help out greatly with housing. I'm not talking about dollars for people who are able-bodied. I'm talking about folks who are in their 70s, 75, up to 80 years old, those who are living on fixed income who are really in need of assistance. I have a neighbor that we're trying now just to find his roof, entire roof, well, 2 neighbors really, entire roofs have caved in.
Mm-hmm.
They're like 86 and 87 years old. They don't have the money. So that's just an example that I'd be asking for. And again, it's not for able-bodied persons who can work. It would be somewhat obtuse to supply money for folk who can work to fix their own homes.
Okay, so you're asking for this to come out of the ARPA funding, correct?
That is correct, sir.
All right, so you said 2 to 4. Would you make a split and say 3? Because I can't, the number has to be in the motion.
3, sir.
Okay, so do you want to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we procure $3 million, sir.
$3 million for housing rehab, and that money will be set aside, and then we could have a housing committee meeting to figure out how we want to go forward with this.
That's
I'll
correct,
move for
sir.
approval.
A second by Ms. Johnson, moved by Mr. Darby. Discussion, Mr. Moody.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think I've got a problem with this. I just want to make sure we've got controls in place to give applicants the proper, that to Mr. Darby's point, that it's not anybody coming through, that there's, I don't know what the test is, maybe Ms.
Well, we will
Grant
do that.
and
He
her
just-
team can develop some kind of test that
Yeah.
says, is it income, is it disrepair of the house? I mean, there's got to be some safeguards to make sure this money's just not flying out the door.
I think what he's asking for is to procure the money, and then we come back through a process on the housing committee, and then we give that to Mr. Rant, and then they come back, that's what the recommendation, because certainly, you can't just go rehab a whole house. It'd probably be a cap of maybe $25,000 per applicant, and then you'd have to stay in the house for a number of years, and the grant is forgiven. But I think right now he's just asking to procure the funds. Right, Mr. Darby?
That's correct, sir.
All right, so that's what he's asking
Yeah,
for.
I'd like to see some structure around it before, I'm okay with the money, but I'd like to see some structure around it before I ultimately send it forward. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Mr. Swears?
Chairman, I assume you mean that we would tentatively approve the funds. I mean, because if in the housing committee, we don't really come to an agreement on how this is done or
Structured.
distributed, then we might just vote no.
Yeah, and the money goes back into whatever part of the ARPA it comes
This is a
from.
tentative agreement
Yeah.
to allocate the
All,
funds.
all he is doing, like we have done before, we have moved money to have it there until we come up with the plan, and then if the plan is suitable to everybody else, then council have to vote again to move
And
that.
if we don't come up with a plan, then the money
Yes, sir.
doesn't stay in that category.
That's correct.
Correct, okay.
Okay, anybody else?
Well, yes, sir.
Ms. Johnson?
Oh, thank you. I mentioned before about several requests that I've been getting from people, elderly citizens who are trying to repair their floors and their roofs. So I think it's a good idea for us to make a move now on this. And so we'll put this on the next housing committee for discussion. If Ms. Christian will do that. Okay.
And what this does too, not only does it keeps people from being, well, it keeps that house affordable. And I'll tell you why. If that person is forced to move out because of a roof out floor, then there's no more affordable housing. They have to go rent somewhere else. And so if we don't fix up what we have now, the affordable housing crisis is going to get worse. So that's the way I see it. And I think this is a way we can make quick, good impacts and help those people stay where they need to stay versus moving out and going to these apartments, because I will tell you what these people are doing now, and these one-year leases, they'll give you a price for 1 year, and then the next year, the price goes up probably by double or either maybe half of what it is, and you're stuck. Where you gonna go? So I think this is something that we can do impact and help the housing market right now.
Can I just respond to that just briefly?
Yes, sir.
Teddy, as you know, I've always been a big supporter of rehabs. And I
Yes.
do believe it's better if we can keep those folks in their own home. That's what they prefer.
Yes, sir.
And I think we can do it much more cheaply. I drive through the country all the time, and I see homes that are falling in. They're not totally gone, but they're about to be.
Right.
And I think we can potentially
Yes,
turn
sir.
the tide on that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Red. And the thing about this is, too, if you let them sit up so long, after 6 months, you got to rehab the whole house.
They're gone. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to rehab the whole house. You got to go through the whole. You got to bring it up to the new
I totally
codes
agree
of
with
South Carolina.
The concept, I totally agree with.
Okay, Mr. Whitman.
Yeah, I mean, I fully support the concept. I think that, when we talk, as we move towards addressing housing as an issue, this is frequently a part of a general plan, as I understand it, and the ones I've seen, that you would have a rehab element, as Mr. Schwiers has advocated for before. And so I certainly thank you, Mr. Darby, for bringing this. I guess when it comes to timing, I don't know, Vice Chairwoman Johnson, when we're planning on having that next meeting, but I did want to just make sure. It kind of sounds like staff is going to have to come up with a program to implement all of this, and I just wanted to make sure that we don't probably do that final decision until that plan has been put together.
Yes, no doubt. Okay, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Ayes have it. Item 3B.
Approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? We move to items 4A, B, and C. You want to take them separately or all as one?
A through C.
Second. Second by Reverend Middleton. Any discussion?
I have a question. What is 4C? I never got any information on
Well,
that.
4C, Mr. Swears, and I was going to catch you on the way coming in, but I had somebody else in the office. What this is, Mr. Tootin is asking for council to reallocate $50,000 from our council contingency into his account so he can do certain incentives, certain morale boosters to keep the employees up, because as you know, a lot of people are leaving or going, and so this would give him an option, a tool in his toolbox to help secure and keep, our employment, because I don't know whether you know it or not, but a lot of people are just leaving, and most of them are just going to drive Uber or do something else because they figure they can make more money. So I think this is something, he's not asking us to do this on an annual basis. He's just asking us to do this. Last week, he had a cookout for his employees who work under him. And I think he fed, how many people was Christian? Did he feed about 600 people?
Yeah.
And he paid for that out of his pocket for the meats and all. So he shouldn't have to be doing that when we have money already here
I
for
would
that.
put my trust in Mr. Tootin to spend money wisely.
I'm going to ask that he also be reimbursed his money, sir, his $600, whatever it is. I mean, because he shouldn't come out of his pocket.
Well, he can do that.
I-
I asked him about it, and he said he don't want to do it, but if he decides he want to do it, then,
Fine, sir.
he
That's
has
fine,
the
sir.
authority. All right, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. And this will be for all county employees. All right, Mr. Darby, we're going to move to planning and public works, sir. Will you go ahead and take that
I'd like
over?
to go to the administration policy first, sir, if that's all right with you.
All right, okay.
Approval of minutes, please.
Approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? None. Mr., I'm sorry, Ms. Ham. I'm sorry, ma'am. Yes.
Yes, sir. So this is a proposal to amend the council rules with regards to bond counsel. Your finance department actually brought this to my attention as it was constraining to their timeline for things. It's my understanding that the history of this was added to council rules at some point in the past pursuant to something that was going on at the time that has not been an issue since that time. So these are my suggested changes to the council rules with regards to the procurement of bond counsel.
Move to approve.
We can't vote on this. This will have to go back to finance. This is just for a recommendation.
Gotcha.
Yeah. It'll come back to admin policy rules at the next meeting. So this is just for information purposes.
Okay.
If anybody had any questions.
Thank you, sir. I understand.
All right, thank
All right, and now we can go to our planning and public works, please. Approval of the minutes?
Move for approval.
All in favor? Aye. Those opposed, nay. We're moving forward. Mr. Councilman Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Thank you for taking my call over this weekend, and you as well, Chairman Pryor, and I thank our citizens from Capri Isle for being here. For those of you who don't know, Capri Isle is down Wapu Road in my district, and something has happened down there that is coming soon to each and every one of your districts. That's this concept of sober houses. In January, a house was purchased in the middle of this, 40-year-old neighborhood, single-family homes. Construction crews showed up, neighbors as they be, or they start poking around. What's going on? Let's meet the neighbors, and nothing's going on. Then we heard word that maybe a sober house was coming to this place. So I called Mr. Evans, Mr. Smalls, and they sent county code ordinance people out there and met with whoever they met with. They were assured nothing like that was going on, that there was just a single-family home coming. And then in February, the county received a notification about a notification to organize a business, a 24/7, 365-day-a-year sober house on this site. Applicant Lighthouse Recovery, LLC, and according to the South Carolina Secretary of State website, that organization was formed in November of 2021, 3 months before this house was purchased. So setting aside the need for this type of facility, we can debate that. This process has got me and my constituents really aggravated. There's a potential loss in market value. The reading and research I've done shows there's always petty theft that increases in this. There's no regard for the existing homeowners' right to quietly enjoy their property with having this dumped in the middle of them. And Planning and Zoning has told me that the initial ask was for anywhere from 14 to 20 beds. How would you like that next door to you? Our Planning and Zoning right now allows up to 6 non-related people in a house by code. So this is disturbing on so many levels. The recorded mortgage that the neighbors found was a mortgage for a single family home that stipulated there would be no commercial operations there. The filing on the tax system, on the county's tax system, seems to suggest that it's going to be a single family home taxed at 4%, which we probably need to review that as well if that changes are coming. So there's been a lot of things that have not been disclosed properly to this county or this neighborhood. So I have asked Mr. Evans, Mr. Evans, you want to pop over to that microphone and let's talk a little bit?
Yes, sir.
As I mentioned, the county code allows up to 6 non-related individuals to live together. What are our other municipalities doing as far as, so the big 3, what do they do as far as allowing non-related family members to live together?
The city of Charleston allows a maximum of 4 unrelated. Town of Mount Pleasant, a maximum of 3 unrelated. And city of North Charleston allows a maximum number of 4.
So for the past, since I've been on council 5 years, we've been, especially in West Ashley, trying to really get our zoning and planning groups talking to each other, right? So that so people can't go constituent or jurisdiction shopping. Do you know when this county number of 6 was established, or why it was established?
Mr. Moody, as far as I can remember in the 23 years I've been here, that 6 has been in our ordinance. That was something that was developed at the original zoning and land development regulations ordinance at that time. I don't know the exact reason why that 6 was chosen versus what some of the other municipalities are doing.
Are there any unintended consequences if this council were to consider moving to 4? I mean, I can imagine that maybe 20 years ago, before you came, 25 years ago, that maybe the outskirts of West Ashley or James Island or wherever, Allendale, Mr. Schweers, were unincorporated, and there may have been large families, large groups, whatever going on out in the country, and that may have been the source for it. But now that we've pushed out so far, we've got these donut holes that people can really take advantage of and jump around. So what's the unintended consequence, if any, to matching our jurisdictions, our municipalities?
The only thing I can think of is, and I don't know how many there are, there may be a number of houses that are utilizing 6 unrelated people to live in.
They could be non-conforming approved if they were such.
Yes.
Mr. Evans, or Mr. Tootin, I guess, he's still gone. I just asked this to be on for discussion. I mean, Mr. Swears caught me in the hallway. He was stunned about this as well. I welcome the discussion, but the city says, well, we don't know what to do. The town of Mount Pleasant says we don't know what to do. That's not good enough. That is not good enough. We've got to figure out a way to put some structure on this thing, whether it's so many bathrooms per heads or, I mean, how many cars are going to be there if we've got 10 people? I mean, can you imagine the mess and the mayhem on this? This is a single road that goes in and out of this neighborhood. You got, how many ever cars are back there? I mean, what a mess. We've got to lead on this. I mean, if the city throws up their arms and Mount Pleasant throws up their arms, well, then let's lead. Let's try to build some structure around this thing so our friends at Capri Isle, what happens to them don't happen to everybody else in these districts around here. Because this stuff is coming up. They're all over Carolina Bay and West Ashley. I understand they're in other places in West Ashley. You may not know about it, and I don't know if this particular one has got any organization to it. Some of those in Carolina Bay, Reverend Middleton, are for-profit companies. They're monitored. Their programming goes on there. So the neighbors hardly even know it's there, but I don't know anything about this. I mean, these people could be coming and going and raising all kinds of heck. I mean, that's a problem for a quiet neighborhood. We've got to lead on this thing and put some kind of structure in place that stops this from happening, or at least gives us an opportunity, or BZA or somebody, to weigh in on this thing without dropping it right in the middle of this neighborhood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Breyer.
So, Mr. Moody, what would you want? You would want to see if we could go back to 4 versus 6?
Well, I think that'd be a great start because, number one, if I understand from Mr. Evans that with some of these, I guess, properly run houses, that maybe accommodations have to be made for some of these things. But if our number starts at 6, it jumps off from there, then you go up to 8 or 9 people or 10 people. What if our number starts at 4?
But if the number goes up, that would have to be approved by this council.
That's correct. We would have to have, I would assume,
Right.
we would have to have an ordinance
You'd have
change.
to have a vote on that. So those people that got 6 now, they'd be automatically grandfathered in. You can't change that.
Unconforming, correct.
Right, you'll be grandfathered. So you're asking, well, we can discuss this at a later date if you want to bring up a motion to move from 6 to 4, but I need to know legally where would that put us at? And it's only in the unincorporated area.
Correct.
Yes, it's only in the unincorporated. So, Madam Attorney, and I'm not expecting you to answer that tonight, but maybe by the next couple of meetings, give us an information, if we go back from 6 to 4, if that would not cause us any legal actions. But I'm with Mr. Moody. When he called me about it, I told him, I think 6 people sharing one bathroom, and then they want to go up on the numbers. It just, to me, that's amazing. I mean, it's only 3 people in our house, and we got 2 bathrooms, and I'm telling you, sometimes that ain't enough. My granddaughter gets in there, and she stays in there, and you never know when she's gonna get out. So I mean, I'm with Mr. Moody. I told you that when you called me Saturday. I think it needs to be something, if you have these houses, got to have at least 2 restrooms in it, and and some other stuff. But as I told him, I was in Melrose last year. I told you that somebody had called and needed some help, and somebody knew them, and for just 3 days over the weekend, it was like $300 and something bucks. But I heard they're getting $800 a month for these things for one bed.
A head, yeah.
Yeah, a head. That's for a head. So if you got 6 in there, that's $4,800. That's kind of a huge profit, $4,800. So we don't want to hurt anybody, but I wouldn't want it in our neighborhoods either.
Just for purposes of council, my office has been coordinating with Mr. Evans. We are happy to continue to do that and try and figure out a path forward.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, I would love to hear from everybody, but I'm happy to take the lead on it because it smacked me right in the face with this thing. So I'd be happy with Mr. Darby's blessing to work with staff and the attorney and maybe report back to my chairman of Planning and Public Works and bring it back to this chamber, this group at some point when we've got something that makes some sense. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to put this out here because it's going to happen in your district, and you're going to have 40 unhappy constituents call you, and we cannot say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. We've got to try something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right.
Mr. Swears?
Mr. Evans, so I want to make sure I understand this. So somebody owns the home, so they're the landlord, and they rent to as many as 6 people independent of each other?
we don't get into the ownership or how it's run. The base of our definition of family is 6 unrelated by blood or marriage is the maximum. There's a carve out in the ordinance that allows up to 9 people to be considered a family under certain circumstances.
But it's still considered a residential use, even with, I mean, that's a
Still
business. That's a
considered.
business in my mind, but it's still
Yeah.
considered residential.
It's considered a residence because they're using it as their domicile.
Yeah. And how long, I'm not familiar with these facilities, to be honest with you. How long do the folks typically stay?
From what I understand with the sober house use, it's in the 90-day range.
And how, I mean, are we, you might not want to answer this, but are we confident this was all done legally? I mean, this whole process, they followed our guidelines? I mean, it sounds to me like the application didn't really meet what they were really doing. Are we looking at anything else? I mean, is this good to go? They've already been approved, or where are we on it?
Mr. Swears, I'm a bit unclear about your question. Will you just restate it for me?
I mean, do we feel like the applicant went through the proper process, and as far as the county's concerned, it meets our ordinance, and we intend to approve it?
So there is contingencies within the ordinance that Mr. Evans has raised that we are currently working through. I don't know that an approval has been issued at this particular point. I think the number was still up for negotiations. I do want this council to understand that Capri Owl does have a covenant for their neighborhood.
Next question.
That's exactly right. It is not it is not within the county's purview to weigh in with regards to whether or not this particular property fits inside or outside that covenant.
Yeah, I do understand that,
Yes, sir.
but they certainly are within their right. Their community can certainly hire a lawyer and sue to that effect. All right. That's all. Thank you.
Just one more quick one. So are we going after these people to make them 6% versus 4%? Because it is a business.
Yeah, that would be up to the assessor, Mr. Chairman.
Could you work with the assessor to make
Yes.
sure? Because
Well, I think from what I understand how the assessor works, the 4% is very restrictive. That's got to be your main house where your voter registration and your driver's license is from. And so that's only from.
Don't get that.
But you have to actually live there.
That's correct.
To get that. So if somebody,
correct.
if it's an LLC in Columbia,
That's correct.
they don't live there, so then they pay 6%.
That's correct.
So that's easy. That's an easy fix.
Yes, sir.
If none of those folks who own it lives there, then we need to be charging them 6%.
Yeah, I can't imagine that they would be qualified for the 4%.
Well, I think we need to check, somebody go in your office or whoever, check all the registry and see how many of these things that we have in the unincorporated area, and then we need to start taxing them at 6%. That's easy.
Ms. Johnson and then Mr. Werman.
Oh, yes. I guess I just wanted to get some clarification on this zoning for not allowing more than the 6 non-related people to be in the household. So I was just wondering, does assisted living houses fit this category, or?
That's a separate category
different
in our
thing.
zoning ordinance, and it's defined differently. in
Okay.
this. Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little thrown by this. I mean, are we talking about having roommates? Because I don't know that doesn't seem as narrowly tailored as we could kind of get this. I mean, I think, I'm not going to sign up for reducing the amount of just people generally to have roommates. Now, if it sounds like, as it certainly does, there's some versions of this business that are doing very well and doing fine and hopefully playing by the rules, and there's some folks who are deceptively coming into neighborhoods, I'm fine to kind of get into that. But, I'd be interested to see this, but, this may be an unpopular opinion, but we are in an epidemic. I was speaking with some folk from Charleston Center, and we probably do need some sober houses around here and throughout this country. So, to the extent that folks are breaking the rules to try and build them, that's fine. To the extent we want to maybe regulate that and kind of have some understanding of what's going on, that's fine. But I don't want to outlaw sober houses in Charleston County because there's certainly a need there. So I'd hate to be the the Debbie Downer here, but I do have some concerns moving forward, but I'm certainly open to this discussion.
Mr. Sass?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very concerned about this. I'm certainly not against sober houses, but I think we're looking at this the wrong way. I think this is almost like an Airbnb in a neighborhood, and we wouldn't allow an Airbnb there probably, but they would allow this. I mean, I think this kind of use needs to be in a more of a fringe area that's along a commercial area, where a commercial area and a neighborhood back up to each other maybe. I just don't think this should be in the middle of a residential neighborhood. The other people that moved into that neighborhood expect the neighborhood to be the neighborhood and not these kind of enterprises show up. And this is what this is. This is an enterprise for somebody who's making a lot of money. Sure, they're doing a lot of good. I'm not saying we don't need sober houses, but I don't think this needs to be in the middle of somebody's neighborhood. Thank you.
I'm just going to say, Mr. Werman, you're not by yourself, sir. Any other discussion? If not,
Thank you, Mr. Darby,
Yes,
for
sir.
letting us have the discussion. I appreciate you taking my call the weekend.
I'm not going to give my remarks at this time, but we now come to the close.
Anything else come before this body? Meeting adjourned.
Mr. Swift? Mr. Swift?